But let me go to Kenny Deery, who joins me, Chief Executive of the Galway Chamber, and he joins you on line one today from a business point of view. Kenny, good morning to you. I don't think anybody saw this coming from a COVID point of view and level 5.
Well, it was certainly, good morning, Keith, it was certainly one way of upsetting a Sunday evening and sending a missile across the bows, that's for sure. And listen, I don't think we did. I was part of a full day of budget dialogue cross-party last Friday where, we had 2 senior government ministers and a range of other deputies, and the budget discussions that we were having were focusing on an operational economy coexisting with COVID, not moving back potentially to 5 as has been suggested or recommended in last night's letter.
But my understanding was, though, that you went from 1, 2, 3, 4, and ultimately the ultimate sanction was 5. I didn't actually think that they would go from 0 to 5 or 1 to 5 in that space of time.
It does seem to be fairly radical now. I know if you take a wider picture, not just looking at Ireland, I think what certainly what I was reading last night is that they're taking a European perspective, and you're looking at the likes of Madrid gone back to fairly difficult lockdowns, places in northern Spain, some areas in France, and of course our neighbours in the UK. So I think they're not alone in looking at this tough positioning, but certainly from our point of view, where I suppose nature has us that we're looking at Galway, we're looking at Mayo, we're looking at the West, we're looking at Dublin, but I think the CMO and the wider team are taking into account what's happening across Europe as well. And unfortunately, there's not really much to inspire you in terms of places that have really got this right yet.
No, New Zealand, Australia seem to have, but they've gone through quite a bit of turmoil themselves during the process of getting there. Like, this is not going anywhere very quickly. The coronavirus is not going to leave us. But other calls that we've taken, and indeed since last night I've taken calls from people saying, so it's okay for the colleges and the students to be out and the kids to go to school and go to creches and otherwise, but the rest of us just have to lock down.
And the practicality of that, Keith, and many people will be listening this morning. Some are business owners, some are working across a whole range of industry and professions, and maybe unemployed and looking to see what the prospects are for them. And I think if this decision is made, and I certainly wouldn't like to be in the leadership position this morning in government having to make this decision, because if you don't follow, and I know your introduction said, is this a kite flying exercise? And again, we really don't know at this stage. It's a very serious one if it is. But the decisions that will be made today, tomorrow, need to take account of the economy. And I know some will say it's a health crisis. It is. But equally, if we have a significant economic crisis and it's not handled right, then the impacts of this will be wide-ranging. And I think, Keith, if a decision is being made and we are moving somewhere gradually towards 3, 4, 5, then it needs to be made on the basis that this is going to cost. It needs to be made on the basis that businesses need the original wage subsidy scheme back, not the one from September onwards that we're seeing a gradual improvement, because employers won't be able to co-fund wages at that level when their business is closed or significantly impacted. It has to be on the terms of some further, I won't say restart grant, but some sort of stabilisation funding to inject cash in where it's needed, and it has to be in terms to give certainty around rates out into Q1, Q2 next year of a waiver. So I think if government are making the decisions and they do follow the health advisory, they do it in the knowledge that they need to add a couple of 100 million more to the national debt to bring everyone who has been struggling and trudging along over the last few months, to make sure that we bring them through to year end and give some prospect of recovery for next year on an economic basis.
But do you see them doing that? I mean, and financially, can we afford this moving into the future as a country?
It's hugely challenging. I think one of the bits that we have been, and whoever is to be complimented on this, there are always success as many fathers and mothers. Our credit rating on an international level is strong at the moment. Our ability to borrow is strong. So I think if government, certainly we know from the conversations last Friday, they were focusing on an expansionary budget. It was focusing on a large-scale capital programme to try and help rebuild the infrastructure that we need around hospitals and schools, and also create follow-on employment. So, Keith, I think they've no choice. And, Pascal Donoghue, even in his role at a European level at this stage, our reputation is strong. and with the right proposals put in place, I think we can. That the best thing we can do is borrow strong, make sure we calculate this right, and support the sectors that need it over the next 6, 12 and 18 months, because what we don't want is a long-run 5-year recession where, unfortunately, the right instruments weren't used at the right time. That's going to be more costly in the long term. So I think we need to be brave. We need to use the credit rating that we have on an international level and borrow and make sure that we leave no one behind. I think this is the important thing. Keith, last week, one of our team did an exercise with some TY students, and it was just to capture in the city centre the level of occupancy of retail premises, because we're noticing more closures, and that's unfortunate. Some high enough profile names and some well regarded names, and within a kilometre of Ayr Square, in that kilometre radius, there are 46 vacant premises either closing down or closed. And what you don't want is to see a trend where that continues, and into early next year we have more and more vacant premises, because that means that our city centres and our town centres are struggling. That becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy for down the road. So I think decisive and clear leadership needs to be taken now. If they are following these recommendations, and neither you nor I are health experts, so we'd have to let them muddle that out between themselves, but if they are, it has to be in the knowledge that a serious amount of an injection needs to be made to make sure that companies can continue to maintain their staffing levels, that people aren't left behind.
Can I just ask in relation to the nervousness that's out there? There's a nervousness amongst businesses and employers and employees. They just about scraped through. The last lockdown, and here we are back in again on the 5th of October, perhaps into another lockdown. So that nervousness that's there needs to be leadership, decisions made, leadership. Is it 3 weeks? Is it 4 weeks? Is it 2 weeks? Because I thought 2 weeks might flatten the curve. But what's needed now is information, not to leave this dangling for another 36 hours until they have a cabinet meeting tomorrow evening in Dublin Castle. Correct.
People need to be able to plan and have some solid basis of information that they're planning on. And as this is right across all aspects of our lives. This is about weddings. This is about our arts festivals, Galway 2020's events that were being scheduled over the next while. People making plans as companies and as corporates for their teams coming into Christmas, and all of that at the moment, as a result of last night's announcement, is up in the air again. So we need some degree of certainty and a roadmap that sets out, I think you and I talked about this before, what good would look like over a period of 3 months. And if there needs to be difficult decisions taken for a few weeks, then take them, but make sure that we support everybody, that nobody is left behind. And I don't mean that in a cliched way. I mean it in that will take a serious injection of money. But at least there's a roadmap given then to say, well, if we do this for 4 weeks or 3 weeks, then this is what we expect to happen. And over the following 3 months on a gradual basis, this is what will happen. That's what will give us some degree of certainty. But at the moment, we can't continue on this yo-yo basis where you're up, you're down. Last week, we were convinced in Galway that there was going to be an announcement to see us go to level 3. Then that didn't happen. There was some relief. There was some discord. And we just can't keep business and life can't operate on that basis. So, I'd certainly, as I say, I wouldn't like to be in the decisions in the boots of government this morning where they're contemplating these decisions and the ranging impacts. I think your point is valid around schools and universities, because you'll have a whole clatter of people breaking the 5K radius, and the enforceability of it then becomes highly questionable, because if guards begin having checkpoints in the morning on school runs, well, then the city will be more congested than ever. So there's a lot of practical implications that I think haven't been thought through on this, and as I said, the next 24 to 48 hours are critical to make sure it's got right. But if it is, that Minister Pascal Donoghue and Minister Michael McGrath are there to give certainty to the business community and to the wider community that they will be supported.
Stay with me if you don't mind. I just want to go to Councillor Alan Cheevers. He's been ringing around his Fianna Fáil colleagues since this broke last evening, indeed, and he joins me on the line. Alan, good morning to you.
Good morning, Keith.
Thanks for joining us. Now, you've been ringing around your Fianna Fáil colleagues. What is the feeling amongst your Fianna Fáil colleagues?
I think there's serious concern about us going back to level 5, and I have to fully endorse what Kenny has just outlined there. I said I would have definitely the same reservations in relation to businesses. I think that maybe it will be a bridge too far for many businesses. And I believe that that what we have to see now is real leadership, and I'm sure the Taoiseach and the government leaders will sit down today. They will analyse the recommendation, But I think that we have to live with this virus, Keith. I think public health is paramount, but we have to live with that virus, and we live with the virus, and we have to look at the economic impacts in our city over the next 12 months and even longer. I mean, this virus is not going away until we have a vaccine, and I think it's vital now that we look at how we can live with it, how we can analyse the recommendations that have been given today by NEFIT to the party leaders, and to see how we can actually come with a plan that we can leave businesses open but still keep public health paramount. And so, I mean, that's vital. And Keith, I just want to say, if I look at, let's say, for example, my own brother, Thomas, who has a pub in Moylaw, he opened 2 weeks ago, and he was closed for over 6 months. He's opened, he's adhered to the guidelines, he's been very, very careful in opening his business, and now he's going to be told again that there's a possibility that he'll have to close down, and that will have serious impact on him in a country village. And it's not just him, it's many country businesses and city businesses right across the city and county, but also right across the country. So I think what we have to do is, I think there has to be a real serious approach of analysis by the government today on how they're going to approach this. And I think what we don't want to see is a situation whereby we have long-term implications for businesses and for people. And the other thing as well, Keith, obviously, is people's mental health. I think that has to be mentioned as well. I think that we're coming into a winter period, and which is obviously, going to the darkness and of the winter. And I think that mental health is something that this would have, a level 5 would have a serious impact on as well.
Kenny and indeed Alan, today, I mean, the blame game is on, so it is. It's the student and the pubs that have caused this problem. It's the Dubs coming to the west that has caused this problem. I mean, the blame game is there, but there's no, really and truly, it's the county finals, and you should have seen my Cullen last night is coming in there. This is not about blame, but
no.
But there is a blame game, Kenny Deery, going on there now this morning.
There is, and listen, that's part of that is human nature. I think we collectively have to rise above that. Looking back isn't going to help anything. So, it's actually a pointless exercise, and it gets people, and Alan's right about mental health, but it gets people exercised, and you see some of the strings of commentary on Twitter particularly, and on Facebook, where the blame game goes on, and that just causes more upset. I think, famous expression, someone far more famous than I used the thing, we need to draw a line in the sand. But here we are on a Monday morning, we need to look forward and think, right, how are we going to cope with this? Whatever decisions come from government this week, what individually and collectively we're going to be able to do to try and cope with this, number one, and two, to understand how we ensure survival of businesses, maintaining relationships with staff, making sure that we don't drop, that after all the good work that's done from March through to now, that begins to unravel, because that could very easily happen with one or two bad decisions. And I think the whole thing about blame games and looking backwards just isn't helpful. We learn from mistakes of the past if they're made. I know, to be fair, there was some commentary last week, why wasn't there a lot more planning done for students coming back in the same way as the Galway races? And there were some fairly reasonable and sound thoughts and comments in that. We don't get everything right, but I think what we have is enough months' worth of experience at this stage to figure out how to still coexist with this, as Alan said. And looking backwards is not helpful. Let's look forward and make sure that if October and November are to be, and heaven forbid if we are to be going down the road of these restrictions or some more enhanced restrictions, how we do it in a supportive, community-based way, in the way that was exhibited in March and April when this all happened first. You had GAA clubs delivering to neighbours, to elderly people in the community. You had organisations totally pivot the way they're operating. And a lot of innovation has come out of what's happened over the last few months. We're looking at a lot of tech and smaller companies that have totally evolved their operation to survive, Keith. Yeah. And I think it's that sort of optimism we need to go into the winter with. To be fair, Simon Harris had a tweet up yesterday, and it I thought captured the essence of the mental health bit pretty quickly. He was in his car parked, and the windscreen was covered in rain, and he was saying he had to go into the supermarket, and the thought of getting wet on a cold winter's clammy Sunday evening, and it was saying, listen, just make sure you ring a friend, you keep the bright side out, and if you need help, these are the phone numbers to engage you with. And I thought on a Sunday evening it captured the essence of what many people are going through their minds when they look out the window and you're thinking, oh God, it's awful miserable out there, and then the CMO's announcement compounds it. So we all have a responsibility to try and work together progressively and stop the blame game.
Alan, can I ask you finally then, does the Taoiseach Micheál Martin, can he fast forward this rather than dithering? I don't mean him dithering, but dithering as a cabinet for 36 hours until tomorrow evening when they were due to meet in Dublin Castle?
Well, my own analysis of that is that I personally believe that this morning the party leaders, the government leaders, party leaders will meet. They will meet with the Chief Medical Officer. They will do an analysis of the recommendations. And I think tomorrow then there will be a cabinet meeting as you outlined there. Will there be decisions this afternoon? Will there be will the Taoiseach decide to make a quicker response to it? Possibly.
I think he needs to. They need to.
Yeah, that possibly will happen. As in that, he will look at the recommendations, and I think we need to get clarity. I think the general public needs clarity, and I think that what we all want to see is where we go from here. But as I outlined earlier on, Keith, is that I personally believe that level 5 is a bridge too far for businesses, for people's mental health. I think we have to do an analysis of the data today, of the recommendations, and see what way that as a country we can work without having to impact businesses and people's mental health. And I think that would be very, very important. So that's my own personal point of view. That's not a Fianna Fáil point of view. That's my own personal point of view. But I think that's the way that we should be going forward. I'm really concerned, as I say, about the businesses. I'm concerned about people's mental health. But, I fundamentally, I think that we did, from March up to May and the beginning of June, whatever, that people worked very hard to get the curve down, so to speak. I think people now really need to take responsibility, as Kenny said. We need to redouble our efforts personally. Everybody is responsible individually for their own actions, and I think we really need to do that. And I think if we do that, as we've showed before, we've great resilience. We can bring the numbers down. I think that's vital, that going forward to fight against this virus and to avoid situations like what possibly is impending, that's what we really need to be doing.
All right, Councillor Alan Cheevers, well, it's NEFIT versus the Cabinet, and who's going to win out here? Is it going to be level 5